in Yemen at around 11:30 in close coordination with what the American Air Force and ships were doing. And then they were back in Cyprus by 3 o'clock this morning. So a lengthy mission helped with an air-to-air refueling aircraft. And yes, I've been told that while there's not an expectation of further strikes immediately, that the RAF and other forces are clearly ready to strike again if necessary.
Fascinating range that, Deborah, for those sorts of aircraft. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later in the programme with Sean Bell. For now, do stick with us, Deb. We'll come back to the topics. But for now, let's look at the UK justification. An Armed Forces Minister was on breakfast earlier talking about why Parliament hasn't, at least yet, been consulted.
It is unfortunate that the moment that was militarily expedient last night was on the eve of a day on which Parliament doesn't sit, because I know that colleagues around the House, quite legitimately, on behalf of their constituents, will want the opportunity to discuss and debate what has happened and to seek to understand the government's wider analysis on things like escalation, such as you've just asked me. But that moment will come on Monday, and in the meantime, both the Speaker of the House of Commons and the shadow front bench were briefed on Privy Council terms last night before the strikes went in. It's important to stress that the Prime Minister hasn't taken a decision to launch any more strikes, but the warning that the UK, the US and other allies and partners made last week still stands, and the Houthis should take note of that.
On breakfast, let's bring in our political correspondent Amanda Acas, who's in Downing Street for us. Amanda, could Parliament have been recalled, though?
It certainly is possible that Parliament could have been recalled, although it typically doesn't sit on a Friday, and indeed most MPs were well on their way, if not already at home in their constituencies last night, because that's what they typically do on a Thursday night. I thought it was interesting that the Minister did say it was unfortunate that the timing of this meant that Parliament couldn't be consulted. Equally, he signalled to the fact that it's unlikely they would have wanted to pre-declare their intentions to the Houthis in terms of their likely military response, that they would have been able to prepare for these attacks then. And certainly what's interesting is that Labour are pretty solidly in support of this action. So Keir Starmer this morning saying that these are attacks that had to be dealt with due to the fact that they are on commercial shipping, trade routes, putting civilian lives at risk, and therefore they do support this action. So even if they had been recalled and there was a vote, it doesn't seem that there is going to be any kind of vote, but if there was one, Labour would be in support anyway, so there's no chance really of a government defeat. That said, Labour say they do want to hear from Rishi Sunak at the earliest possible opportunity, so that will be on Monday, setting out the full justification and the scope and the limits, importantly, of this action. Sir Keir Starmer also calling for the legal position of the government to be published as soon as possible on all of this. Needless to say, there are many MPs in Labour in particular and other parties who are uneasy about this. Jeremy Corbyn described it as disgraceful that Parliament hadn't been recalled, and the Liberal Democrats also not happy about it.
Amanda Acas, thanks for that. Let's bring in now our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who's in Jerusalem.